Hey, it's Isabella Taylor, Australia's youngest interviewer here, and welcome to the Inspired By podcast. Do you wake up excited to start your day? I've been an inspirational story chaser since I was 6 years old. Everyone I've interviewed loves what they do, and to them, it's not work. I'm so excited. Are you ready? In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, let's go, people! Australian hyperrealist artist Robin Eley shares his inspirational story, beginning his journey in art drawing as a young kid. Eley was born to an Australian father and Chinese mother. In 1981, his family migrated to Australia, where he completed high school at Pembroke School in Adelaide, South Australia. In 1987, he moved to the United States, where he attended Westmont College, captaining the basketball team and earning a Bachelor of Arts degree, majoring in fine art in 2001.
As a young creative myself, I'm fascinated by Australian-renowned hyperrealist painter Robin Eley's journey in developing his ultimate passion for art. Starting off drawing Garfield and basketball players as a kid to becoming a professional illustrator, then literally taking the world by surprise, making a leap of faith from pencil to paint, creating a stunning, real-life-like self-portrait of himself that awarded him runner-up in the Doug Moran National Art Prize in 2010, which catapulted him onto creating incredible wrapped portraits, heavily influenced by history, creating his reputation as an artist today. The discipline, conviction and self-belief that Robin has demonstrated on his journey thus far is incredible and inspirational for us young creatives. I wish for this story to set your creative juices on fire to a life of personal fulfillment, doing what it is you love. That is exactly what Robin has achieved, and his art, as he describes, it's so connected to who I am. It's just me. Was that black limo what you had in mind?
It was more than what I had in mind. It was incredible, and I thank you very much for the experience. I've been all over the world, but I had to come back home to finally take my first ride in a black Hummer, so thank you very much.
We like to take things very, very seriously.
Clearly.
When I was looking at your paintings, I thought that you actually wrapped it. And when I saw it at your house, I was like, very surprised that was even possible to be able to do, because I've seen people replicate the Mona Lisa, Starry Night, Girl with the Pearl Earring and stuff like that, but it was another level to paint that. And do you paint it first? Or no, you don't. You paint it with the plastic.
That's actually probably the most common question I get, is whether I do the painting first and then paint the wrap over the top. No, you're right. I paint the whole thing at one time, because there's the plastic obscures, blurs out, it changes what's underneath to the point where there's really nothing to be gained by painting the painting underneath first. It's much actually easier to do it all at the one time.
How would you describe your life from age 5 to teenage years?
To be honest, I believe that if we talk in terms of my creative journey, it really began when I was probably 2, because I vividly remember drawing when we lived in London. And I moved to Australia when I was 3. So I can remember back when in London we had this metal tray that was a Union Jack, and it was filled with crayons. And I remember we had this one room where I'd do my drawings, and I'd just go and grab crayons out of the tray and I'd be drawing. So that's when my creative journey started. And then as we moved to Australia, I never stopped drawing. On a summer afternoon, the cricket, I'd put on the TV and I'd sit down and I'd just draw from morning all the way through to night, go to bed, wake up in the morning. The first thing I'd do would be run up to that room and see the thing that I'd spent all day. It was the most exciting moment of my day, was to see what I had just drawn the previous day, and then I'd sit down and I'd draw all over again. But then obviously there was, as a child, you do other things as well. And for me, it was sports and drawing, and that's the way it began. But it also, as a kid, made me feel good about myself. And I think that being a little maybe socially awkward or anxious, and not that comfortable making friends, found it difficult to make a lot of friends. Those were the 2 things that I retreated to as the way just to feel good. But then they gradually went from that to the things that sort of began to define me as I grew up, and I became known as as the basketball kid, and then a little bit later in high school became known as the art kid as well.
With parents being able to recognise a passion in their child, what advice would you give to them in being able to facilitate to what the child needs to pursue that?
That's interesting, because I think my opinion on that has been formed now more as a parent of young children rather than my experiences growing up, because I don't really I just remember I had the space to do it. I had the opportunity to do it. And having now seen my kids take up art every day, I know now that the only thing that I've really done to foster that, myself and my wife, is just to give them the stuff and then just step away and make the things available for when the mood strikes. You never know what's just going to kind of set the mind on fire. One thing that we've tried to do recently is, limit their interaction with things that do the thinking for them, like devices, for instance. We haven't taken them out of the house because navigating the use of devices as a child is actually, I think, is important, because they're going to encounter it wherever they go. I know growing up, it was TV. So when you sit down in front of a TV, it would do the thinking for you. It would do the entertaining for you. And I went from being able to write stories as a kid, suddenly I couldn't do it anymore because I had stopped thinking because I'd watched so much television as a kid.
I realised, even though we're completely different people, we both moved to a different state or country when we were 3. And when I was little, when we lived in Queensland, my mum would leave paints out on the grass in just different spots, and I'd just dip my hands in the paint and smash it on the paper. Mm-hmm.
I would encourage any child who loves making art, don't judge yourself based on your ability to copy something, because that does not define your ability as an artist.
When you're at school, you were told to loosen up. Mm-hmm. When you recognised your passion, did that change people's perception of you?
In much the same way as a child is taught to embrace art if they can replicate reality, as you move through art school and you get older, I think teachers are taught, if you encounter a child that does that, the best instruction you can give them is to loosen up and let it go. And I think that can sometimes be good advice, but for me, what it made me do was lose a sense of myself in my work and really lose that connection that I had my whole life. If you're lucky enough to have a teacher who really connects with you and understands you as an artist and a person, that advice will be catered towards you. But for me, it moved me away from what I loved to do and made me really question my ability to do it professionally. But it was only when I really realized that, hey, this is who I am. I have always made artwork this way, and that's not a bad thing. That's just who I am. When I really leaned into that, that was when my ability to craft a career and evolve as an artist really began to develop. If your goal is to reach a point where you can become a professional artist in some form, it takes a lot of failure and a lot of making. And the only way to make and continue producing at the level that you need to is if you enjoy what you're doing.
Basketball is a very enjoyable and popular and accessible sport across the world. How do you think playing it helped you on your path of self-development?
It gave me something to join, I think. Growing up, you want to be part of something, and drawing was great, but it was always in isolation, right? To the point where no one really knew that I did it until the very end of high school. Basketball, it was my social activity, it was my physical outlet, and it was something about, for me, being a kid that sort of lacked confidence in social settings. When I walked over those lines on the court and inside the white lines of that court, I felt confident. And so that for me was the foundation upon which I really built my entire identity in childhood, because it was the one thing that I was publicly good at but also really enjoyed. It taught me the value of hard work as well, because I went through a period where I didn't really practice. I think because I was good, I could be good without practicing. And then suddenly I looked around and all the other guys around me were getting better than me because they were working on their game outside of just playing. They were practicing, they were training, and I wasn't doing that. And all of a sudden I went from being one of the better players to not being that anymore, and that was jarring. And so I was like, right, I'm going to start working. And I immediately saw the benefit of putting in longer hours and working on developing a skill. And when I decided to move away from basketball and focus in completely on my artwork, that sort of laser-like focus essentially just transferred directly from basketball to art, and that same work ethic that I'd applied came with it, and that enabled me to develop my technical abilities and progress my career faster than I otherwise would have had I not had that athletic grounding. I didn't feel like getting up at 6 a.m. and going and running around the basketball court in freezing cold temperatures. I didn't feel like going to the weight room and lifting weight. But you just do it because that's what you're supposed to do. And it develops that sort of discipline and the ability to just kind of click into mode really quickly at the drop of a hat. And so I'm fortunate in that respect because, as I said, the most important thing in developing as an artist is to just keep producing. It's that continual production that allows you to move down that road maybe faster than other people are moving down that road. And because as an artist, specifically for what I do, there is only so many spots on the top of that hill, because a lot of people want that, but the industry can't support, millions and millions of artists. So you are kind of, in a sense, in a little bit of competition with people, which is an uncomfortable thing to do with something you feel so passionate personally about.
Mm-hmm. And I think people have formed this idea that I think a lot of people struggle with art, finding their own style and wondering if it's going to be successful or not.
Yep.
Because when I draw, I compare myself incessantly, and people say don't do it, and I try not to do it, and I try to be natural and just comfortable. I can't do it. It's really hard to move away from.
If you find out how to do it, make sure you tell me, because I'd love to learn how to do that as well. It is the advice that everyone gives, but no one's actually figured out how to successfully adopt. So I think having a group of friends and surrounding yourself with family and friends who both understand and can nurture your journey, people that really know you, that really care about you.
You went to the US when you were 19. Would you say that was an integral part of your success?
Oh, it was foundation. It changed everything for me, because when the kid that I was when I left was not the person that returned when I came back, because American culture is very different to Australian culture, and I was not prepared for it. And the person that I was here was, very quite shy, very reserved. I would never speak up for myself. Over there, that did not work. I got swallowed up almost immediately, and I struggled, and I had to learn to develop a sense of self. And so for me, being over there for those 5 years, both studying and playing basketball, really shaped who I would later become, or who I am now. College, the first year was a real struggle. I didn't want anyone to talk to me. I knew that if I spoke, I would stick out like a sore thumb because of my accent. People couldn't even understand when I said my name. They got my name wrong. And so I couldn't handle it. I was so mortified by the whole experience that I bought a beanie and pulled it down over my eyes, bought headphones, put them over my ears outside of the beanie, and just walked around and just did not want to make eye contact with anyone. But then when I came back my second year, I don't know what had changed in me, but I just felt bigger. I hadn't grown physically, but I just felt like my world had expanded, and I felt much more comfortable in myself. It was at that point, I think, that my artistic brain was given the space to evolve and grow from there.
When you returned from the US, you then, until about 2005, you created an illustration portfolio, which you then boldly took back to America. Would you say that was crucial in your career?
What I did when I immediately got back was I just launched into digital illustration because I'd studied it in college. And for the first few years I was back, I was doing things that were primarily like textbook illustrations. So you would do like a digital illustration of like a set of scales, and on one side would be like a stack of apples, and the other side would be like one watermelon, and like the scales would be even, and that would go into a math textbook. And so you would do like 80 illustrations and you get paid like $20 in illustration. It was like such a lot of work for very little money, but I was able to make art and have someone pay me for it. So it was kind of cool. But then I realized I needed to learn more. So I returned to the US over 2 consecutive summers and studied at an illustration summer program taught by the best illustrators in America. And that gave me, and this was traditional illustrations of drawing and painting. And that gave me all the foundation I needed. And so from there, I created this portfolio and then basically took it back to America and hit the streets of New York, cold calling magazines, publishers, anyone who would give me the time of day to come in and put my work on their desk and show them what I did. So it would be publications like Time magazine, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes. I used my story as being Australian. If I've flown all the way over from Australia, can you just give me 10 minutes of your time? You come in there, you make the best impression possible, and then you ask, is there anyone else that you know that might be interested in seeing my work? And they pick up the phone, they call their friend over at this magazine, and then next thing you know, you're catching the subway over to that magazine, and you're going up the elevator and trying to get the same kind of handball effect. And so every year I do this, and I'd end up meeting with like 50 or 60 magazines, and I'd just keep going. And so I was living in Adelaide doing this work for 5 or 6 years for all of these New York publishers. And then I ended up doing some advertising work, and then a children's book with Disney, which is a really interesting process. Yeah, and so I was kind of all over the place in terms of the application of my work.
Would you be able to tell us what book it was that you did with Disney?
Yeah, it's called How Many Cats? The author, I think, is Lauren Thompson. It's not in print anymore, but last I saw, if you go on Amazon, you can get secondhand copies. It's a counting book about a bunch of cats that invade a house that a dog lives in, and they take over the house, and the cats arrive sort of one by one or in groups of 2 or 3, and gradually the numbers of cats count up to 20, and then the cats begin to leave the house, and it counts down to 0. And by the time they leave, this poor dog is left in a house that's been completely destroyed by cats. It sounds very simple to do something like that, but it was one of the most difficult jobs I ever did.
What gave you that confidence to take the leap of faith from pencil to paint?
There was no confidence involved. It was either I do it and I have a career, or I don't do it and I don't have a career. I've never been less confident about something in my life. It was the most difficult thing I think I've ever done creatively, because I felt so secure making pencil work. I was really good at it, like perfect. I knew that as soon as I tried to do anything in paint, I would not be able to achieve even remotely close to the level of perfection. And so doing the one thing in my life that had given me such pleasure and comfort, to suddenly make that like the point of the most pain in my life was something I really didn't want to face up to, because I knew how painful it would be to learn how to paint. So what I ended up doing was just edging up to it ever so slightly. So I went from pencil, and then I started to use a little bit of watercolor, a little bit of ink, and gradually I would like mash together these mixed media pieces. So it would be ink, watercolor, pencil, and then a little bit of acrylic paint, and then a little bit more acrylic paint, and all of a sudden I'm doing an illustration that the background was now all acrylic. So I was kind of almost doing a little bit of painting. But then it reached a point where I started working on this piece, and I'll never forget, I did the whole thing in paint. It was a girl sitting on the floor with a beautiful floral dress, and I did the dress in paint, did the background in paint, and I got to the face, put the paint brushes down, I got out my pencil and I started coloring in the face, And I finished it. I was like, this is ridiculous. What are you doing, Robin? Now is the time, if there was ever a time, to just suck it up and do an actual painting. Now it's it. This is it right here. And so I picked up the paintbrushes and I made myself paint that face. First face I've ever painted. I will never forget the moment when I finished it and I looked at it and I couldn't believe that the person who had avoided painting for 27 years of my life, because I was 27 when I made this painting, had made this thing. And it sat in my studio for a couple of years because I could not believe I'd done it, but I've painted every day since then. And I've been chasing that feeling every day since then. That feeling of revelation of like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe I made that. And it's a feeling you only get a couple of times, I think, in your life. And the next time I had it was when I decided, because the next big thing for me was now I could paint with acrylics, right? But I knew that really success lay for me in learning to paint in oils, and it's a very different animal. Easier in some respects, but a lot harder in others. And so I avoided that. So for the next 5 years, I painted only in acrylic paint. And eventually got to the point where I said to myself, I need to learn. I need to make myself make an oil painting. And so that was in 2010. I made my first oil painting, and that oil painting launched my career as I know it today.
Was that the one that you entered into the Doug Moran National Portrait Prize?
That's the one, yeah.
So you had no practical, full, in-depth knowledge of how to oil paint before that?
No, none.
What led up to you creating your first self-portrait oil painting?
It was extremely difficult because I had, as much as I wanted it, I had zero connection emotionally to my artwork, having been a commercial artist for 6 years. Now I was asked to have the most personal connection to my work possible, and I was floundering. I had no idea what to do. All I knew was that I wanted to do it. Having no personal connection to the work, I thought, what is the one thing that I know intimately and no one can question how much this thing would mean to me? And it was myself. It's a self-portrait. So I used it as a vehicle to really explore myself, both artistically, but conceptually and creatively.
Only 4 people knew about your painting. How did you keep it such a secret the whole time?
I hid it in the closet. When people would come over, I would take the painting off the easel, put it in my closet, get something else that I had finished and just put it on my easel. I've kind of continued that pattern throughout my career of when I'm working on something new, I don't really want anyone to know. It's really personal. It's between me. It's me versus the painting or me versus the idea. And until it's fully resolved, I really don't want anyone to know about it.
I add a lot of excess, fluffy stuff onto my questions.
I think you're incredible, by the way. You're absolutely incredible. Keep going, yeah.
What did it feel like realising that you and 2 other artists had actually been selected as the 3 finalists for that competition?
I arrived at the media call of the morning of the opening. I walked into a room and there were not 30 other artists in the room. There was just 3 of us. And I didn't know how these things worked. I now realize why those other artists were looking so nervous and shifty, because they knew that something good was about to happen, but they just didn't know how good. Because for this particular prize, there's a big difference between the first prize and the second prize. I realized that every person in that room was there to be awarded something. And so my heart started to really pound because we're talking, this is my first oil painting. When they got to the painting prize, they announced the 2 runner-up prizes. And when they got to the second, the other runner-up prize, they said, and this is the first time entrant into the competition. I knew instinctively that was me because by this time I had researched all of the artists and I knew that I was the only one who was entering for the first time. I just started crying. I just looked at Rachel and just started saying, no, this is no. And it still to this day is a really emotional thing for me to even recount, because it was I could feel and see my life changing in real time. I went up on the stage ramble through some kind of acceptance speech. I don't even know if they were wanting an acceptance speech from me because I actually wasn't the winner. I was just a runner-up, but I, for some reason, gave a speech. And I think that the guy who won, who's since become a really good friend, Michael Zavros, I think that when he saw me up there, he probably thought I was maybe emotional because I was maybe disappointed that I didn't win. But for me, I was ecstatic with runner-up. It made me start sprinting rather than crawling forward because I was sort of hesitant and just making this one painting. But as soon as that happened, I was like, right, we're going. And I just abandoned all my illustration work and just started working on paintings with the hope that one day people would want to buy them and I'd be able to sustain myself as an artist. Creatively, if you're able to move in straight lines, it's going to be good for you. And I say move in straight lines in the sense that if you've got something in mind that you want to achieve and you move towards it, rather than just kind of zigzagging, you'll get there quicker. I always tell people that once you move to that place, the view's going to change. And when that view changes, you can reassess if you actually still want to keep going in that direction.
How have you found social media like Instagram and Facebook for marketing your art?
I'd like to say it's not important, but it's really important for my work. If you can communicate to all these people in your life that this is you trying to change your life, it's amazing what can come from that. And all of my friends, all of my colleagues, all of the people that have been following my journey, they all rose up almost as one. Moving on to now, where I would say most people find my work through social media. I don't work with galleries traditionally anymore. I represent myself. And so what I show on social media is really important.
It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Robin Eley. Thank you so much for coming on Inspired By.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Robin, for sharing your inspirational journey with us thus far. I hope this episode sets your passions on fire. Love to see you in the next episode. Head to inspiredby.com.au. Thank you so much for listening.